Okay, so this is going to be the third and final lecture on photosynthesis. We're going to talk about the final stage of our photosynthetic process, which is the Calvin cycle. Let's start back though with what we made back during the light reactions and during the photosystems and the electron transport chain. We were ultimately able to produce oxygen as a waste byproduct. So we have some O2, which we had gotten rid of. We were able to obtain some charged up ATP and some charged up NADPH, which was holding that energized electron. ATP was made using the ATP synthase molecule and using hydrogens moving down their concentration gradient to power that. So now, when it comes to the Calvin cycle, we're going to utilize these molecules along with our unused carbon dioxide to build a glucose like C6H12O6. Before we do that though, let's talk about cycles. Whenever we say a cycle, what do we mean? We mean something that repeats itself over and over and over. It's not something that happens one time. It's a sequence of events that continually reoccurs. Like our weather cycle is spring, summer, winter, fall, spring, summer, fall, winter, spring, summer, fall, winter, over and over again. It keeps on going. The Calvin cycle is a biochemical cycle. Okay, it's a chemical sequence of chemical reactions that can occur over and over and over again. So we're going to rather simplify this, but we need to understand kind of what is going on to be able to generate a carbohydrate just from carbon dioxide. Okay, so let's just start there with our carbon dioxide. We have some CO2 in our atmosphere. This plant ultimately wants to grab that CO2 and do the photosynthesis thing and end up with that carbon right there being hooked together in a carbohydrate, like that 6-carbon C6H12O6 glucose molecule. So we have to grab this carbon from the air. There's a special molecule that is what we call an initial carbon acceptor molecule that allows plants to grab chemically grab or bond to that carbon. Okay, that molecule is known as RUBP. Okay, RUBP is a short chemical name for a compound that is able to chemically bond to this carbon. That's what brings carbon into the cycle. If I could not chemically interact with something, I can't chemically react with anything. So we have to first be able to attach to those carbons. So this is our first stage. We use our RUBP to grab the carbon. And if you remember, since we're going to want to make a 6-carbon sugar, we're going to have to grab 6 carbon dioxides. So let's say we've got 6 CO2s. So what that ends up making for us is it allows us to generate ultimately 12 molecules of a compound called PGA. But what we're going to do is not worry so much about names as worry about the number of carbons. So we're going to generate 12 molecules that each has 3 carbons in it. So you understand what we're looking at. This carbon is individual. You have 6 carbons. I should just do this like this. You have 6 carbons that aren't connected. They're floating around up here in the air. Hi, carbon, right? They're not hooked together. So they each attach to one of these molecules of RUBP. And there are 6 molecules of RUBP. Each one of those RUBPs grabs a carbon. Once it grabs a carbon, that RUBP breaks in half. RUBP itself has 5 carbons. It's a 5-carbon chain of a molecule. Carbon, 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 right? So it's 6 5-carbon molecules. Each of those 6 5-carbon molecules grabs one of these free carbons. That's a total of 36 carbons. which then they split in half and form 12 3-carbon molecules. This is just the first step. All we've done so far is grab some carbon. And remember, since this is a cycle, somehow we have to get back to over here. Well, at this point, this is where our products from the light reaction come in. Because we don't want some 3-carbon molecules, we want glucose, right? That's ultimately what we want to get. So we need some energy to rearrange these molecules to get them to the state that we want them, which is ultimately glucose. Yeah, we can see that. Which has 6 carbons bonded together. Where did we get these 6 carbons right here? We got them up there. First, we had to grab the carbons, rearrange ourselves, and now, in order to get to this stage, we have to invest some energy in it. Because remember, energy is involved in chemical bonds. So we need our ATP and we need our NADPH. Right? Both of those molecules are high energy and they're going to donate their energy to this process. What's going to happen is that will be the chemical energy we need to rearrange these molecules to make one of these. Now, once we donate our energy from our ATP, what do we have? When we donate our energy from our NADPH, what are we left with? Well, we're left with their uncharged forms. At this point, ATP converts back to ADP, or adenosine diphosphate, and NADPH converts back to NADP. Well, what are we going to do with those? Are they just useless? No, we're going to send these two products back to the light reactions so ATP can get recharged with ATP synthase, and NADPH will be able to catch another energized electron coming out of the electron transport chain in the photosystems. So they're going to go back to the light reactions and get recharged. Okay, so we put in our 6 individual carbons. Okay, we bonded those to some of these molecules. We put our energy into those molecules and we rearranged them to form glucose. But we're still not done because we only formed 1 molecule of glucose. That leaves us some other carbon compounds. So once we pull those carbon compounds out, instead of having 12 3-carbon molecules, we're going to only have, let's kind of go here, we're going to have 10 3-carbon molecules. 10 times 3 is 30. 12 times 3 is 36. Where did our 6 go? They ended up being pulled out, but as a different form as glucose. Okay, so we've got our sugar. We want to though, or we need to, in order to get back up here, we have to rearrange these 3 carbons to get them back into that initial shape, that RUBP, so we can grab more carbons. Remember, this is a cycle. In order to keep the cycle going, you have to reset the cycle back into that initial state. That's called regeneration. So we have to regenerate this cycle. In order to do this, you do have to spend some energy, and we actually have to use some ATP to reset these molecules and rearrange them use some energy, and we were able to rearrange them back into our initial starting carbon acceptor molecule, RUBP. And in doing so, the ATP gives off its energy and becomes I was wrong, adenosine diphosphate here. So RUBP grabs carbon. We rearrange ourselves. We use our energy to build a molecule of glucose. Okay, we need to now reset our cycle. We have to use some more energy to reset to our carbon accepting molecule so we can grab carbons. So, right? And so this is a cycle, and it can keep happening over and over again. As long as the materials needed for this will work. So what do we need to make this happen? Well, what we need is some carbon, obviously. We have to be able to grab carbon, and we have to be able to have energy. that is ATP and NADPH available to drive the cycle, right? Your bicycle wheel doesn't turn unless you push on it. There has to be some energy invested in it. This cycle or sequence of chemical reactions requires energy to maintain. If you don't put in energy, it won't keep going. So this also brings up a good point. If light isn't shining on a plant and that plant is not doing the light reactions, you are not getting ATP and NADPH, and therefore you can't keep this cycle. So plants, very good, right? So plants want to, as long as they're getting these molecules, they want to have carbon dioxide and they want to be generating all of these sugars, or as many sugars as possible. So this is really limited by the amount of light that a plant is getting. More light means more energy means more turns on the cycle, and that means greater growth and more production of sugars. Okay, so this is what we make ultimately is this one big 6-carbon molecule of glucose from these 6 individual carbon from carbon dioxide. All right, that is the Calvin cycle, and that finishes up photosynthesis.